The following episode will contain references to stories and characters that may cause sudden and uncontrollable feelings of nostalgic joy and wonder. Listener discretion is advised.
You know who you are? Steeven is my name. Even Steeven.
Will you say something, Steeven?
Steeven or Else Media.
You're listening to another G.I. Joe podcast, and this is episode number 2, Panic at the North Pole. Hello and welcome to another G.I. Joe podcast. I'm your host. My name is Steeven, and together, folks, we are going to read every goddamn G.I. Joe comic book out there, every issue and every collection, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to talk about all of them. I mean, except for the ones that I can't get to, because, there's only so many hours in the day, and I do have like 83 other podcasts to work on, so come on, give me a freaking break. Jeez. Anyway, today we're looking at G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue number 2. This issue sports a cover date of August 1982, though it hit the shelves in May. It sold for just 60 cents, and it is entitled Panic at the North Pole. It was written by Larry Hama, Don Perlin was the penciler, Jack Abel did the inks, James Novak did the letters, and the colorist was Bob Sharon. When an American research station in the North Pole is raided and all personnel are killed, Generals Austin and Flagg fear that the Russians are involved and decide that a small team of Joes should be sent in to investigate. And so, Scarlett, Stalker, Snake Eyes, and Breaker are all called back from leave and are tasked to covertly observe a nearby Soviet outpost. Soon, the Joe team watches from a blind overlooking the scene as a large Inuit with a larger machine gun arrives at the outpost. Stalker snaps a few pictures as the big man enters the lone structure. Less than a minute ticks by when the big stranger is back outside and moving on, leaving the door to the outpost open behind him. The Joes find this behavior more than a little suspicious. I mean, who leaves a door open when it's just so damn cold outside, right? What are the Russians trying to heat the North Pole? Anyway, the Joes enter the Soviet outpost to find that everyone inside is dead and has been for at least a week. Along with the corpses is a long-range, ultra-low frequency transmitter that's capable of affecting human brain waves, which appears to be missing the frequency modulator. Furthermore, the safe has been rifled, and Scarlett postulates that the big Inuit must have made off with some files. That's about as deep as the investigation can get when Snake Eyes discovers an armed and ticking bomb under a table, and so the four escape unscathed as the outpost explodes behind them. Thinking that maybe the large Inuit with the machine gun wasn't your average dude, the Joes set off in pursuit, learning that the man is a mercenary named Quinn and that he's a dangerous man indeed. When the Joes catch up to Quinn, the big man has made camp for the night in a wrecked seaplane. As the team approaches, they learn that Quinn has laid out a bit of a trap for him, and he forces the team to surrender. He takes their supplies and their weapons and confirms that the Russians were using their research station to beam low-frequency fear waves at the United States as part of an experiment to induce mass paranoia. But something went wrong. The shielding on the Russians' transmitter failed, and soon they had become so paranoid that they thought the Americans, over in their research station, were spying on them. And so the Russians went on over and killed themselves some Americans. Back at their outpost, the Russians had grown so paranoid that when their heater broke down, they were in no fit mental state to fix it, and so were taken by the elements. Quinn tells the Joes that he was hired by the Russian government to cover it all up, and that he's to meet up with the Russian submarine to turn over all the records as well as the frequency modulator. He then clarifies that the only reason he's telling the Joes any of this is due to the fact that he's going to leave them out there in the frozen wild with no supplies and no weapons, meaning, of course, that they will surely perish. With that, Quinn leaves. Stalker, however, refuses to give up. and he orders his team to strip whatever useful material they can from the broken-down seaplane. They cobble together an ice sailboat and outrace Quinn's dog sled. Then they set up an explosive trap and an ice bridge, but Quinn sends his dog sled in as a decoy. Quinn bests the Joes once again, but admits that taking this job for the Russians was a mistake. He detests what they're doing with fear waves and feels that the right thing to do would be to turn over the frequency modulator to the Joes. But he just can't. He's a man of his word, a man of honor. He made a contract with the Russians, and he means to carry it out to the letter. If only there was something he could do to fulfill his contract and yet keep them from taking the frequency modulator back to the Soviet Union. Later, Quinn meets up with his Russian contacts and hands over the records and the frequency modulator, fulfilling his contract. As he's packing away his payment and is making ready to leave, he informs the Russians that while he had hindered the Joe team at every turn and left them 5 miles away without the firing pins to their weapons, he did leave a little something a mile back atop a cairn as an offering to the spirits of ice and snow that fear would vanish from the world. And the little something that he left? Well, it was a necklace of weasel skulls, which had also been decorated with the Joes' firing pins. Furthermore, he explains that the Joes are already on their way here to the rendezvous, and he wonders if they might reach the cairn and the firing pins before the Russians can. All right, so let's dive deep into this sucker. We'll start, of course, as always, with the cover. We are obviously, based on the cover, we're somewhere in the land of ice and snow. We have 4 Joes on the cover. We can see Scarlett, Snake Eyes, Stalker, and Breaker. Breaker is, as always, blowing bubbles from his bubble gum that he is constantly chewing. So even though they're in the Great White North, it's snowing, the air around them is frozen, he's still able to blow bubbles. I think that's pretty amazing. Behind them in the background is a Quonset hut, which is on fire. This would either be the Russian or the American research station. We don't know, but we have a little exciting blurb here that says, "An American research station annihilated. A Russian base destroyed. The G.I. Joe team must probe. The panic at the North Pole." I rather like this cover. It feels comfortable to me. I'm sure that's just the nostalgia more than anything. But yeah, I enjoy the cover. It's penciled by Herb Trimpe. So I guess I'm just pointing that out because I do enjoy old Herb's work here on the G.I. Joe. We get into the issue. We open up with a splash page. Tells us that we are at the North Polar Ice Cap. Tells us at the very top, there's a box at the top that would normally be at the top of most of the Marvel comics at this time, which has a blurb that kind of gives you a quick little background bit on whatever hero or comic you're reading. It's just a quick little sentence or two. And this one says, "Quartered in top secret armored underground bunkers deep beneath the Army Chaplain's Assistance School at Fort Wadsworth, New Jersey, is the most fearsome rapid deployment team of all. America's elite counter-terrorist strike force, G.I. Joe, a real American hero." And then we get a little bit of narration or a caption box that tells us that we are at the North Polar Ice Cap. We are at the American Research Station. There are a number of soldiers walking around. We can see an Army helicopter in the background. The research station is just a Quonset hut, and it's got holes in it, bullet holes, and maybe just big, like somebody threw giant rocks at the thing or something. But they appear to be bursting outwards, so they must be bombs or grenades or whatnot that could have been exploded inside the research station. But one of these soldiers is trying to relay this information back to the States to tell General Flagg, to fill him in on what's going on up here, what they've discovered. Being that it's 1982, in order for him to do this, he needs the help of 3 other guys. First is the guy that's holding a video camera, basically. Because, well, this soldier is making a video call. But again, it's 1982, so they have to use just a regular. It's more like a TV video camera, like the kind you'd see back in the 80s. You'd see somebody on the scene for a news channel. They'd have that big camera on their shoulder. And then the soldier who's making the report, who's talking to General Flagg, he's holding a microphone, and both the microphone and the video camera, neither of them run on batteries. So they both have these cables coming off of them that are running to a generator that is being controlled by two other dudes. So those are your three dudes, the guy holding the camera and the two guys keeping the generator running. The generator also has a satellite dish on top of it, so they're beaming this information out to the States. And the soldier is just telling General Flagg that somebody has attacked this outpost. He explains that they had lost contact with the station a week ago and that severe weather conditions prevented any sort of relief mission. But now that they have been able to make it out there, they find that it's just been wiped out. There's been some kind of raid, and that all the personnel are dead and all the records are missing. Turn to the next page, and the soldier is telling General Flagg that it just doesn't make any sense. The nearest settlement is like 100 miles away, and it's across the ice. And it's a Russian research station. Why would the Russians do this? And he asks for permission to, as he puts it, load up my air mobile boys and buzz Ivan's base for a look-see. But General Flagg tells him negative, don't do that. They haven't heard anything from Moscow. They figure if something like this was sanctioned by the Russians, they probably would have heard about it, either officially or through, their spy network. And so he doesn't want to risk taking what is a pretty bad situation and making it worse. And so he tells the soldier, seal the station and clamp a security lid on your personnel until further notice. And with that order given, he turns over to his comrade, General Austin. Those two hang out all the time for some reason. I'm not sure why. General Flagg has always been associated with G.I. Joe, and that started here, I guess, or at least this version of G.I. Joe. But I don't remember a obviously General Austin was in the first issue. He's in this issue. But I don't remember him really sticking around. I don't know when he goes away, but I feel like G.I. Joe at some point just becomes General Flagg's responsibility. Anyway, Generals Flagg and Austin, they have a little conversation about what may or may not have happened out there, and they decide that it's probably a good idea to send out a small Joe team just to see what's going on, just to go out, give it a look-see. At least that's General Austin's recommendation. And General Flagg is already one step ahead of him because he has taken the liberty of pulling the dossiers of the 4 team members that he feels are best qualified for the mission. Then we get this fun bit over like the next 3 or 4 pages where we get to see not only the 4 Joes who have been selected for this mission, but we get a little peek of what they do on their downtime because all 4 of them are currently on leave. And so Flagg has to send out some people to go gather them up and bring them back in. We start on page 3 with Stalker, somewhere in Wisconsin. He's hiding in the bush. He's got camouflage on. He is holding some sort of device. We can't see it because it's off panel, but we can see in the next 2 panels that whatever it is, it has a scope because he's got that scope trained in on a deer in the distance. And it's a pretty big buck. It's got a fairly big rack on top of its head. And you learn quickly what you think is Stalker hunting and getting ready to kill this deer is not what you're seeing at all, because suddenly a helicopter arrives and scares the deer off. Stalker's very upset about it. For some reason, they just call down to him from the helicopter on a loudspeaker. E5, Lonzo Wilkinson, codenamed Stalker. General Flagg has canceled your leave. And his response is pretty funny. Yeah? I'm about to cancel your face. I've been tracking that stag for 6 hours, and you jokers have just blown my perfect shot. Well, the helicopter has lowered a ladder, like a rope ladder or a chain ladder. And Stalker is climbing aboard the ladder as he's saying this, and now we can finally see what he had in his hand, and it's a camera. We go from there to Breaker. He is in the computer lab at MIT. He's doing something on some weird computer from 1982 that looks nothing like a home computer or any kind of computer I've ever seen in my entire life, except for in comic books like these. But we're seeing him from the back. He's blowing a bubble. there's a couple of ladies off to the side, and one of them is talking about how he's pretty cute. And the other one says that folks around there call him Breaker, that he works for the government, and that he comes in every once in a while to play with the computers. Turn to page 4, and the two ladies come up with an idea, because the one wants to ask him out. She thinks he's cute. She wants to take him out for coffee. And so the other one decides, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we both see if he wants to go down to the commissary for a snack, because it's almost break time. And then while we're down there, I could just kind of get lost, and the two of you could be alone. The first one is really happy with that plan, but they turn and they find that he is gone. The troubling part of this scene, though, the panel that we see that he's gone, basically he was informed by the military through a message on the computer. And we know this because he left it up there. It says, leave canceled, report to pit, flag. So G.I. Joe is not necessarily supposed to be a secret, but they do keep the fact that they are located in this underground series of bunkers beneath the chaplain's assistant school. They keep that a secret. I mean, I think that the Joe team itself it's a secret because they do pose as chaplain's assistants or they're in the motor pool or whatever. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I feel like even though this message that's on this computer screen is kind of vague, these ladies know that this dude goes by the name of Breaker, which is his code name from G.I. Joe, and that he works for the government. And then he suddenly disappears, and there's a message on the screen telling him to report to the pit. So, I don't know, if there was a Cobra agent looking around, they might go, ooh, I better go follow this guy and see where the pit is, because Cobra wants to know where that pit is. We'll learn more about that in the next issue. Anyway, continuing with page 4, we go from there to Scarlett. She is in the San Diego Civic Arena, and she is competing in a martial arts tournament. This is something I really like about Scarlett. Scarlett, you learn that she's got like 4 or 5 brothers, and she grew up a bit of a tomboy because of it, and she is a really kick-ass martial artist. And as she's in the middle of this tournament, she's literally fighting an opponent during the middle of a tournament, and a military guy just comes walking into the middle of the match, comes out of the crowd, steps onto the floor where they're fighting, and he just straight up walks up and interrupts him. Are you E5 Shauna O'Hara, codenamed Scarlett? He then explains to her that he is under orders from General Flagg to escort her back to her duty station and that her leave has been canceled. She is kind of wrestling. She's kind of wrestling with her opponent at this point. She's got her kind of bent over backwards in a headlock. And when she hears the name Flagg, she immediately drops the woman. And we get a sound effect here that just says thud as the back of her head smacks into the mat. Scarlett says, Flagg, why didn't you say so? And then she gets up and she's walking away with this soldier, this military guy. I don't know why I had to clarify military guy. A soldier's a soldier. But they're walking away, and the woman that she was beating, who she dropped to the floor, suddenly just leaps up and charges at Scarlett. On page 5, Scarlett turns around, leaps into the air, and kicks the woman square in the face. I mean, the flat of Scarlett's foot, probably the heel of her foot, bang, right into this girl's face. We don't see it actually connect because they put like a bursting like explosion effect that covers both the foot and the lady's face, but we get a sound effect that says thwack, and I'm assuming Scarlett left the lady bleeding on the floor, probably with a broken nose. Another G.I. Joe podcast will return after these messages.
Hello, how are you? This is Sean Merrick from the podcast Worst Collection Ever, where myself and my wife, Jennifer Stansfield Merrick, talk about the weird, the funny, and absolutely insane comic books in our comic book collection. Are they good? Probably not, but we're going to have fun anyways. We took a little break, but now we're back with brand new episodes, so please check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, even check us out on YouTube, Angry Hero 79. You can subscribe, you can review, you can rate on there, and we would love to hear from you. So check you then.
Step into the savage world of the Hyborian Age and journey through a land of sorcery, steel, and epic adventure with me, Steven Orr, on Hither Came Conan. Together we'll explore the legendary Conan the Barbarian comic series from Marvel Comics, starting with the groundbreaking first issue from 1970 and working our way through each epic tale, one issue at a time. Along the way, I'll also dive into any other Conan comics I can get my hands on, because when it comes to the titular Cimmerian, there's no such thing as too much adventure. Whether you're a diehard Conan fan or just discovering the greatest barbarian of all time, this podcast is your gateway to the blood-soaked battlefields, treacherous kingdoms, and forgotten treasures of Robert E. Howard's timeless creation. New episodes are packed with action, insights, and a little humor, all dedicated to the world of Conan and the creators who brought him to life on the comic book page. So sharpen your swords and subscribe to Hither Came Conan today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Crom demands it!
Into the boat!
And now back to another G.I. Joe podcast. We go from there to Snake Eyes, Columbia University in the basement where he hangs out in a sensory deprivation chamber. And they've got one there in the Columbia University basement. This soldier, this guy appears to be an MP. I'm assuming that they were all MPs. I guess the guy who came to get Scarlett, he did have a black armband on, and I can kind of see the letter P. So, yeah, they're sending the MPs out to collect these 4 Joes. But this guy, he goes down to the basement, Columbia University. He walks into the room, which, according to the door, is the isolation tank lab. There's a dude there in a white lab coat because you can't have a doctor or a scientist. Well, really, I think the rule with G.I. Joe, especially if you watch the animated series, the rule is if you're a scientist and you're not officially a member of G.I. Joe or Cobra, or you're not like an evil, crazy, wacky scientist, you have to wear a white lab coat at all times. Anyway, the MP just kind of walks into the room and the guy in the lab coat just gets all up in his face. Hey, you can't just barge in here. This is intolerable. You have no jurisdiction. But the MP just goes straight over to the sensory deprivation tank and smacks on it with a baton. Don't cross me, mister. I've had a rough day. Okay, Mr. Rank Classified Snake Eyes. Your leave is canceled, so you can pull your wet little bod out of there. And it's at this point that Snake Eyes opens the door from inside and he's starting to climb out. And we don't see his face. We see him from behind. But it's apparent that he is not wearing his mask. And upon seeing his face, this is what stopped our MP in mid-sentence, because he sees the face of Snake Eyes and says, "My God, that face! He'll be far more presentable if you give him time to put his mask back on." That's the scientist, of course, who got all up into this MP's face. There's another guy in the background in this last panel on page 5. I don't know who he is. I don't know what his purpose here is. He's just kind of lurking in the background. He never says anything. Looks kind of creepy. Anyway, the scientist continues. We've grown accustomed to his appearance. He spends up to 8 hours of his time in that total sensory deprivation unit. So we don't know how often Snake Eyes does this, but when he does it, he spends the day doing it. Turn the page. We're now on page 6. It's later, according to the caption box, and we are over the Arctic. The 4 Joes are in a military airplane. General Flagg is with them, and then, of course, the pilot. And General Flagg is giving them the 411 on their mission. He tells them that they are there to observe. That's their primary objective. They are not to initiate any contact with the opposition, and if they're fired upon, they're to withdraw in an orderly manner and contact the command center for further instructions. Obviously, they're trying to handle this as sensitively as possible because this is 1982, folks. We were all worried about World War III with the Russians, nuclear war. It was the fear of everyone. And so this is, without saying it, this is, I think people who, what am I trying to say here? Anyone who was reading this at the time as it was coming out, they didn't need any explanation as to why maybe they're trying to be very sensitive about this and not anger the Russians or even let the Russians know that they're there. We all knew what was going on at the time. We all lived in fear of it. Hell, I had a kid, my older brother's like best friend in the neighborhood who lived behind us. He had told me once, I don't remember when it was in the 80s. It could have been around this time. I know I was a little guy. I would have been 10 when this issue came out, but I distinctly remember him telling me, we're standing on the back patio of our house, and he's there hanging out with my older brother. And for some reason, he just starts telling me that nuclear war is imminent, that a single bomb could destroy the entire planet, and that the button that will launch the missiles is on the nightstand next to where Ronald Reagan slept, the president of the United States, and that if we were to launch any missiles at Russia, they would immediately launch missiles back. That, I think, is the only correct thing he told me that day. But that it didn't matter if we launched first, the entire world would be destroyed. And that this button was there on this nightstand, and that at any time Ronald Reagan could just roll out of bed, just fall out of bed, stumble getting out of bed, and accidentally hit the button, and then boom, we're all dead. And I had nightmares for weeks after that until I finally talked to my parents and they explained to me that that's not how it worked. And as I grew older and would learn based off of, history and movies and TV and documentaries and junk like that, once I learned how it really did work, how, difficult it was, in essence, really, to launch nuclear warheads, I just felt like an idiot. But of course, like I said, I was a little kid, and that guy was a bit of an asshole. Anyway, that's why they are trying to handle this the way they are trying to handle it. The Joes are not to, they want to avoid any conflict. They want to avoid a firefight with Russia. He then tells them that Breaker has been issued a communications rig, which has the capabilities of sending and receiving teleprints so that they can relay visual intelligence as they gather it. And then they will, in return, they will forward any new data back to them as they need it. But he goes on to tell them that their secondary mission is the retrieval of the missing records from the research station. He doesn't care how they get it. In fact, what he says is, I don't care how you get them, as long as you don't compromise the primary mission. In other words, don't get caught. Page 7, the Joes jump out of the airplane. They're being dropped off within marching distance of the Soviet research station. They don't need to observe the American research station. There's nothing going on there anymore. But they want to observe the Russians, see what they're doing, see if their behavior, anything that might be out of the ordinary that could maybe help explain what happened at the American research station. So they parachute down, and then they hike across the icy wasteland until they come across the Russian outpost. They dig themselves into the snow and set up a little blind so that they can basically lay there camouflaged against the snow and watch the Russian station below them. We go to page 8. 6 hours later, Stalker is clicking away with his camera, is taking a bunch of pictures as someone riding a dog sled comes riding up to the Soviet outpost. He's a big guy. He has what appears to be animal skulls hanging from around his neck. He's got a great big old machine gun on his back. And in fact, when one of the Joes mentions, we don't know which one, there's a conversation going back and forth with some of the Joes here. It could be Breaker and Stalker. I don't know, because it's all done in caption form. We don't see who's actually saying what. But one of them suggests that maybe this guy is a hunter who got lost. And the other person responds with, well, first of all, all right, let me back up a second. So when the guy comes riding up on his dog sled, we are told by this caption box, which is actually, again, it's one of the Joes speaking. We just don't know who, because it's done in a caption box. But they refer to the guy as an Eskimo. That's the only time I'm going to refer to that guy using that name for the rest of the book. We know that at the time, the name Eskimo was just the common name used, but we've learned since that is insensitive, and so we use the correct name, which is Inuit. And that's what I'll be referring to this guy as. Actually, I'm just going to call him Quinn, because that's his name. That's probably best. But When one of the Joes points out that he could be a hunter who got lost, another one responds with, no Inuit is going to get lost by 1,000 miles because there's no settlements for 1,000 miles. The closest settlement, the closest thing to this Russian outpost is the American outpost. Beyond that, there are no settlements for thousands of miles, and an Inuit who grew up in this territory would not just get lost for thousands of miles. And then he continues, besides, what do you hunt with a 30 caliber belt-fed machine gun? That's what the guy has strapped on his back, a 30 caliber belt-fed machine gun. And he's also a pretty big dude, and he goes strolling into the Russian research station. He's not in there more than a minute. He comes back out. He gets on the dog sled. They ride away. And Scarlett asks, where'd he come from? And where's he going? To which Stalker responds, that's not the $50,000 question, Scarlett. What I want to know is... And then we turn the page to page 9, and his thoughts are continued. Why did he leave the door open? Because, yeah, who leaves the door open up there in the Arctic? The only reason you would do that is because nobody's home. And if there's nobody home, then the Joes can go into the building and see what's what, because they're not going to encounter any Russian soldiers or Russian scientists or Russian citizens. And so they march on down to the outpost. They burst in, ready to just throw down some cover and fire if necessary. And as we get to page 10, we learn that there are 2 dead bodies in this outpost. 2 dead bodies that we see. They're drawn. One is covered by a blanket, but his head is sticking out. The other one is half laying on a cot. His body's like hanging off the cot. And again, I want to remind everybody that this is a comic book that's meant to sell toys to children. And we had piles of corpses in the previous issue, in issue number 1. We've only got 2 corpses in this one, but still, that's pretty good for a comic meant to sell toys to children. We also learn here, Breaker is looking at all the machinery that's set up, and he says it's all there for long-range, ultra-low frequency beam transmissions, which, as he clarifies, is a biologic frequency that can affect human brain waves. But, he points out, the frequency modulator is missing, and that is a key part to make that machine work. They realize that the big dude that had come in just a moment ago, he probably took that frequency modulator. Scarlett sees that the safe has been rifled and that if the American records were in there, they aren't anymore, and that maybe this big guy took those as well. In the meantime, Snake Eyes discovers that there is a bomb attached to the bottom, to the underside of a table in the room. Well, as we established in the last issue, Snake Eyes doesn't talk. We don't know why he doesn't talk yet. That will come up at some point. But at this point, all we know is that his face is apparently severely damaged. We learned that earlier in this issue. And we know that he doesn't talk. We just don't know why. So in order to get everybody's attention as quickly as possible, he fires his gun into the ceiling of the research station, which, I don't know, that's kind of a ballsy move for old Snake Eyes, right? Imagine you're Stalker or Scarlett or Breaker, and you're checking out this research station. You're up there in the Great Wild North. There's a possibility that Russian soldiers could arrive at any time, and suddenly you hear gunshots within the room. Luckily, these are highly trained military personnel, and they're not immediately going to just start popping off caps because somebody else had in the room. And so they turn to see what's going on. And in fact, somebody just goes, Snake Eyes, what is it? What's wrong? And it makes me think of the old Lassie TV show, you know? What is it, Lassie? Is Timmy caught in the well? You know? That's what this made me think of. What is it, Snake Eyes? What's wrong? And he kicks the table over to show them that there's a bomb. They all run out of the building, and it blows up behind them. Breaker then postulates that maybe the guy who was just there, maybe he's not your run-of-the-mill dude. And so on page 11, they trek back up to their blind where they were hanging out. And Stalker gets his camera. He gets the film out of it because he's taken all the pictures. He gives that film to Breaker, and this is where we learn what his radio teleprint freaking machine thing that he's wearing on his back, this is where we learn what it does. Because it can take that film and it can transmit those pictures back to the States. So it's kind of like a fax machine, but it does take time for the pictures to get from the film through the air back to the States, and then for the Joes or whoever in the military would get that transmission, for them to then look at the pictures, develop them, I guess, and get back with the Joes to tell them based off of the pictures, which are, he took a bunch of pictures of this big guy on the dog sled. So maybe he can be identified. So knowing that this will take a while, Stalker decides that they're not going to wait. They're going to go ahead and break camp. They're going to go after this guy, and they're going to do it at a run. Because as he figures, the guy's got no worries at this point. He doesn't know that there's this Joe team out there. He doesn't know that anybody is following him or chasing him or whatever. So Stalker's just kind of hoping that the guy's going to lollygag on his way to wherever he's going. Page 12, many cold miles later, according to the caption, Breaker's little teletype machine thing starts going beep, 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 clack, 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 clack. And so Scarlett has him stop so that she can see what is coming out of it. And it's a dossier. It's a one-sheet dossier for the dude on the dog sled. His name is Quinn, though it says in parentheses, probably an alias, real name unknown. Says that his date of birth is unknown. His place of birth is unknown. He's about 6'10", weighs about 260 pounds, and it lists his occupation as freelance special ops enforcer. Has worked for the CIA, Mossad, KGB, MI6, and other security agencies. It also lists his special skills. Expert tracker, hunter, woodsman, speaks English, Russian, French, Finnish, German, and 3 Inuit dialects. He's an expert with rifle, pistol, longbow, harpoon, and plastic explosives. And then the last bit of information, it also has his picture, both taken from the front and in profile, and it's got his fingerprints on there just in case. But the last bit of information is his personality profile. And this is an important bit. This ties into to the end, how the end of the issue comes together. And it says, subject never lies, always fulfills contractual obligations to the letter, and will not divulge any information about former employees or operations for any reason. I think the most amazing thing about this bit of paper here that has all this information on it is the way the text seems to know where the edges of the panel is and where whoever's holding it, I guess it's Scarlett, where her thumbs will rest upon this paper, because the text seems to just magically wrap around all that stuff so that we can read everything that's on the paper. I always find that a bit funny. So after getting all this information, the Joes decide to continue on. Stalker points out that it's getting dark soon and that Quinn is going to have to stop and make camp at some point. And if they double time it, they just might catch up to him. And 5 hours later, on page 13, they do just that. Remember, by the way, I feel like I should clarify, whenever I'm talking about page number, I'm talking about the story page. Any ads that might show up in whatever version of this story you're reading, do not count those. Anyway, page 13, 5 hours later, the Joe team comes across a damaged seaplane. And there's somebody sitting outside the plane in front of a fire. This person has a blanket with a hood wrapped around them. And the Joes are viewing this from atop a ridge. They're far enough away that they can't see the face of whoever it is that's sitting by the fire, but it's very obvious to them that A, this plane is broken, and they deduce that it must be the plane that brought Quinn in to this area, and that it must have wrecked. They must have crash landed. And they just assume then, of course, that the guy sitting, or the person sitting in front of the fire, is Quinn. Another G.I. Joe podcast will return after these messages. Do you love podcasting but hate editing? Do you have a number of episodes recorded but just can't find the time to get them edited and ready for release? Do you need help and you're not sure what to do? Well, come talk to me. My name is Steven Orr. I have over a decade of experience recording and editing my own podcasts, and I want to put those skills to work for you. I can remove that background noise. I can reduce silences. I'll remove all of your ums and your uhs, as well as your throat clearings, sneezes, and coughs and such. And I can even add your music and whatnot. And hey, my prices are quite reasonable. Check out edityourpod.com to get started. That's edityourpod.com, or just reach out to me directly. Email edityourpod@gmail.com. Tell me what you need, and I'll tell you how I can help. And more importantly, I'll quote you a cost. edityourpod.com. Get started today.
It is critical you pay attention at this time.
Ready to blast off into Marvel's Novaverse? Join Xandar Radio, a Nova podcast, your ultimate destination for everything Nova. I'm Doug Smith, producer and co-host of Xandar Radio. We bring you news, deep dive reviews, fan spotlights, creator interviews, and epic roundtable discussions. Whether you're a diehard fan of Annihilation, The New Warriors, or love the various Nova runs, this is your show. So grab your Nova helmet, power up, and tune in at novaprimepage.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Xandar Radio, because the Nova Corps needs you.
And now back to another G.I. Joe podcast. And so they sneak down, because it's night at this point. The only light out there is coming from this fire, which would creep me the hell out. I mean, literally, that's got to be a dark, dark place. But they creep down on him. They get all the way up to the fire, and Snake Eyes sticks the barrel of his Uzi up against the back of the guy's head, and the blanket falls away. And it's not a person under there. It's a great big bunch of plastic explosives. Quinn has been on the airplane, or in the airplane, and he kicks the door open, which doesn't make any sense to me because he actually kicks the door off of the plane to make his presence known. And he tells them that he is holding the detonator to the explosives and that there's a fail-safe on it, that if he releases his grip, the explosives will go off. And so he advises them to drop their weapons. Page 14, he collects up all their weapons, throws it onto his dog sled, takes their packs, takes everything from them except their clothes, basically. The whole time, if you're really kind of looking at these panels, Breaker is in 1, 2, 3, 4 panels. 4 of the 5 panels on page 14. Breaker is in 4 of these 5 panels. And 3 of those 4 panels that he's in, he's got a big bubble of chewing gum right in front of his face, which, I don't know. Part of me just thinks that is just the dumbest thing for this character. You know, that's their thing. They chew gum and they blow bubbles. But there's also a part of me that loves it. For some reason, I don't know why. Anyway, Quinn collects their guns, their packs. He breaks their radio, smashes it, and then he tells them all his plan, just like a villain would. He explains to them that the Russians were using their research station to beam low-frequency fear waves at the U.S. in an experiment to induce mass paranoia. He says that the shielding on their transmitter leaked and that the Russian crew became quite paranoid. So paranoid that they thought the Americans were spying on them, and so they killed them. And then when their heater broke, they were too far gone to fix it. Quinn then explains that he was hired to retrieve the American records and the Russian frequency modulator, and to destroy all of the evidence. Says that the crew of the plane, this wrecked plane, is actually waiting for him at a base camp by the sea, where a Russian submarine, will pick him up at precisely noon tomorrow. Clarifying that the Russians are quite punctual, never early, never late, always right on the button. Scarlett asks, "Why are you telling us all this? According to your dossier, you've never divulged one iota of information to a single living person." That's when Snake Eyes gets her attention, and on page 15, Quinn points out that Snake Eyes has the eyes of a shaman. He sees the spirits of snow and ice gazing at his soul like a hungry bear. And yeah, explains that the only reason he's telling them all this is because they're already all dead. They have no supplies, no weapons, and no radio. and he's leaving them out there in the middle of nowhere. There's no way that they can survive. As they all stand and watch Quinn ride away on his dog sled, Breaker, who's blowing a bubble, can't help but agree with Quinn, saying that he's right, we've had it. But Stalker's not going to give up. He says they're going to go after him. And he tells them, this is what we're going to do. Page 16, the Joes are combing through this seaplane, pulling anything out of it that might be useful. And by the end of the page, they have built a kind of like a sled made from the skis of the seaplane. And there's a sail on it. So it's a wind-powered sled, basically. The sail is made from the parachutes that were on board. They have 4 different seats that they used that were taken from the plane. And there were a crap ton of maps within the plane. So they know exactly where they're going. They know how to get there. And now they have a way of getting there and getting there quickly, because if the wind keeps up, they should travel faster than Quinn's dog sled. And in fact, looking at the map, Stalker only maps out a route that is at a slight angle to the route that Quinn appears to be taking. That way they can kind of catch up to him, but stay out of sight at the same time. And then when they catch up to him, they can keep going and go around him and get ahead of him and maybe set up a little something for him that might involve all of the explosives that Quinn left behind. Explosives, by the way, that do not have their detonator caps. Page 17, the Joes have reached an ice bridge, just like an arch made of ice, and they rig up the explosives on top of the arch. They actually rig up this thing because, I mentioned they didn't have the blasting caps. They don't have any guns, but they do have a couple of clips of ammo for their guns. And so Stalker takes his canteen cup. Snake Eyes opens up each of the cartridges from his ammo clips and dumps the gunpowder from within into the canteen cup. They stick that atop a stack of plastic explosives atop the arch, the ice arch. Then they take the 3 skis, they tie them together at the top so they make a triangle, kind of like the frame of a teepee, and they hang a great big human-sized chunk of ice from this teepee frame, basically. And it's rigged with the cord to one of the parachutes so that if Stalker yanks on it, the ice will be let loose from where it's hanging. It'll land on top of the canteen cup full of gunpowder. It'll ignite the gunpowder, which will set off like a very small explosion, which will then detonate the plastic explosives beneath it, and that will cause the ice bridge to collapse. Page 18, Quinn has been spotted. He's on his way. The Joes hide. The dog sled gets under the ice bridge. They pull the cord. The explosion happens. The bridge collapses. It lands on top of the sled, and the Joes rush in to pull the dogs out of the ice to make sure the dogs are safe. That's their number one priority at this point. They're hoping Quinn will stay buried and will be dead, but they got to get them dogs out. And I love the Joe team for that. Anyway, they get the dogs out. They start uncovering the sled from the ice and snow, and they find out that Quinn's not actually there, and that's because it was all a trap. Quinn basically is one smart motherfucker. That's what we're trying to say here. That's what this book is trying to say here. He knew they were going to do something like this, or at least he probably caught them out of the corner of his eye at some point as they were following him, because he truly did believe they were going to die out there. But I'm assuming that at some point during the journey, he catches wind of them somehow. He knows that they're behind him, and he kind of shakes his head in resignation. And he's thinking to himself, these guys are not bad. They're pretty smart too. I got to put on my thinking cap for this one. And so he sends in the dog sled without him on it to spring their trap. And then he ends up besting them for the second time. There's even a moment here on page 19 because Scarlett comes up from behind him, tries to take him out. He knocks her on her ass. Snake Eyes still has 1 clip of ammo. He only used 1 of the 2 clips that he had kept in his boot for the bomb, for the trap. So he still has the second one And so he leaps over to the sled, grabs his Uzi off of it because Quinn had taken their weapons, slams the clip into the Uzi, pulls the trigger, and nothing happens. And that's when Quinn points out here at the end of page 19 at the bottom that amongst this necklace that he's wearing, I mentioned earlier that he had what appeared to be animal skulls hanging from around his neck. Those are weasel skulls. And he has added to his necklace the firing pins from the Joe weapons. So again, the Joes seem like they're about to come out on top, and he keeps just kicking their ass. Quinn just keeps kicking their ass. Page 20, Quinn tells them that this is it, guys. He's going to leave them again. There's nothing around now at this point. There's no seaplane that they could harvest to try to make some kind of vehicle. And he knows that they're all going to die. And so Quinn tells them, "Soon the spirits of snow and ice will devour your souls. That is sad, for you are brave fighters. I regret having taken this assignment from the Russians because they are tampering with fear. And fear is the greatest killer of all, greater than snow or ice. This frequency modulator is a concentrated nugget of fear, waiting to pollute the world with distrust and loathing. I feel that the only way to neutralize it is to give it to you." Scarlett asks, "Then why don't you?" To which Quinn responds, "I can't. A contract is a contract to the letter of the word. If only there were some other way. ... Turn to page 21. It's an hour later. We are now on the coast where the crew of the seaplane has set up camp. They're waiting for Quinn. The sub is due to arrive in 2 hours because these Russians make note that Quinn is 2 hours early. Quinn hands over what he has and immediately demands his payment. They give it to him. Quinn tells the two Russians that the research station has been destroyed and that the American G.I. Joe team has been neutralized. And then tells them that if they will attest to the fulfillment of his contract, he will be on his way. The Russians are kind of confused. They're like, "Well, you did what you were supposed to do, but aren't you going to wait for the sub? Don't you want to go out with us in comfort on a Russian sub?" And he says, "No, I want to be far away when the G.I. Joe team arrives here. I abhor senseless violence." Turn the page, page 22, final page of the issue. The Russians are now pissed. "What are you talking about? You said you neutralized the Joes. You got to stay and protect us until the submarine arrives." And Quinn's like, "Nah, I fulfilled my contract. My job is ended." The Russians point out that he betrayed them to the Americans. And Quinn says, "No, I have done nothing but hinder them in every possible way. I left them 5 miles from here with no firing pins in their weapons. However, I stopped 1 mile from here and left my weasel skull necklace in a cairn as an offering to the spirits of ice and snow that fear might vanish from the world. Perhaps if you found my cairn before they did, you might dispel my prayer. They are 4 miles from it to your 1. And then we get the final 3 panels at the bottom of the page. Panel number 1 is kind of a faraway shot of 4 figures marching through the snow holding weapons. And we get the rest of Quinn's speech. "But they are trackers, and you are not." The second to the last panel is more of a close-up of the 4 Joes. They're all holding guns. Breaker is blowing a bubble. And then the final panel is we've zoomed in on Snake Eyes, and we can see, well, we saw it in the previous panel, but he's wearing the weasel skull necklace, which of course means that they found it, and they have the firing pins, and they're coming to kill them some Russians. And that's how it ends. This was a really good issue. I really enjoyed this one. It's pretty crazy that you think about G.I. Joe and you think if they're going to do a G.I. Joe story, they got to go up against Cobra, right? Here we are, second issue in, no Cobra at all. It's just kind of your standard kind of military op type of story, right? A special elite team of 4 soldiers are sent to the Arctic to figure out what happened at a research station. And a mercenary is there. They get involved. It was good. It was a fun story. Not a big fan of the art. Don Perlin, not my favorite artist, not my favorite G.I. Joe artist especially. He just does weird things to people's faces. I'm looking at this last page, for example, 3rd panel. There's it's just a panel of Quinn's face. And yeah, just not happy with the look on that face. Not all of it looks bad. It's just that every once in a while there's stuff like that kind of throw me off. and definitely prefer Herb Trimpe. But yeah, beyond that, it was a fun story. I like that we get a little bit of background information on at least these 4 Joes. We know that Snake Eyes, well, we don't know a lot about Snake Eyes. We know that he doesn't talk. We know that he covers his face and that his face is damaged in some way that apparently is horrific enough that it makes an MP not freak out, but, he's, oh my goodness gracious, the face, So who knows what it looks like? We know that Scarlett is she's very adept at the martial arts, winning, or at least participating in this karate tournament and at least besting this one person she was up against. I kind of want to go back and look at it now because I feel like, was it the final? Was it the championship round? I don't know. But we learned that Stalker likes to photograph nature. That's a hobby of his, going out into the wild and photographing animals. And we know that Breaker, who just cannot stop chewing gum, likes to go to MIT and play around on the computers. Breaker, I'm going to assume, used to smoke. That's why he chews gum all the time. I'm just going to put that out there. But yeah, great issue. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But that's all I have to say about G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, number 2, Panic at the North Pole. What about you? Any questions? Anything you'd like to add? Email me at anothergijopodcast@gmail.com. And who knows, I may read it out on a future episode. In our next episode, the Joe team returns to the pit, triumphant following a successful raid on a Cobra stronghold, bringing with them a captured Cobra battle robot. When the robot reactivates itself and locks down the pit, trapping all the Joes inside, will Cobra Commander learn the secret location of the Joe headquarters? That's next time when we dive into G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, number 3, The Trojan Gambit, published by Marvel Comics in June of 1982. The synopsis used in this episode comes from MarvelFandom.com with edits and rewrites by me. And finally, the views and opinions expressed within this episode are mine and mine alone, and do not reflect the official policy or position of Marvel Comics, Hasbro, or really any other individual, group, or corporation. So until next time, folks, keep a sharp eye out for Cobra plots. And as always, be nice to each other. Bye! I want to thank you for listening to this episode of Another G.I. Joe podcast. Questions and comments can be directed to anothergijopodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can help to boost our presence online by leaving a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. I also invite you to join our subscription program, Steeven or Else Beyond. And in return, you'll get episodes of Another G.I. Joe podcast early and ad-free. Check out the link in the show notes, or just go to SoManyPodcasts.com to sign up today. Another G.I. Joe podcast is a presentation of Steeven or Else Media. For more nerdy content hosted by me, check out SoManyPodcasts.com. All links will be in the show notes. You're listening to Another G.I. Joe podcast, and this is episode number 2. Hello and welcome to my face. When an American research station in the North that's about as deep as the investigation can get. When Snake Eyes, that's when old Snake Eyes comes in and he says, "Hey, buddy, there's stuff going on over here. There's a bomb under the table. Of course, I can't tell you that because I don't talk. Just do these things with my hands and stuff. Anyway, back to the show." He takes their supplies and their weapons and confirms that the Russians are using their research station to beam low-frequency fear waves at the United States as part of an experiment to induce mass hysteria. Not mass hysteria, mass porno... What? I almost said mass pornography. Oh my goodness gracious, what's going on today? Woo! They cobble together an ice sailboat and outrace... They cobbled together an ice sailboat and outraced Quinn's They cobble together an ice sailboat and outrace Quinn's I keep wanting to say sled dogs, but it's dog sled. Don't think I'll say it that way. Later, Quinn meets up with his Russian contacts and hands over the record. Furthermore, he explains that the Joes are already on their way here to the rendezvous. Rendezvous! Run, a rendezvous. I want to meet Rendezvous and take her out to a movie. Furthermore, he explains that the Joes are already on their way here to the rendezvous. I said it again, rendezvous. Why am I saying it like that? Rendezvous. This would either be the Russian or the American. Research.
I just don't think I can move through life knowing that a guy named Steven did this to me.
How could you let this happen, Steven?
Steven! Thank God. I had a horrible feeling I was going to be the only one here.
You were saying?
G.I. Joe!